What happened when an undercover CEO walked back into his own classic car dealership will leave you speechless. To our incredible listeners, you're the kind of people who value grit, legacy, and doing the right thing, even when no one's watching. This story isn't just about stolen cars or secret deals. It's about how one man risked everything to protect what his father built. You're here because you believe in second chances, in justice, and in standing up when it counts. So buckle up, because this isn't just a business story. It's a powerful ride through betrayal, redemption, and purpose. Graham Whitaker sat alone in the wood-paneled office of Harborline Auto Emporium, the glow of a late-afternoon sun casting long shadows across framed photos of restored Corvettes and Camaros. A thick leather binder lay open before him, customer satisfaction reports from the past 6 months. The numbers weren't alarming, but they weren't right either. A few notes stood out. Vehicle was promised but delayed. Paperwork confusion. Felt rushed. Minor issues to some, but to Graham, who had built this dealership from the ground up on his father's legacy of integrity and precision, they were red flags. His father, Walt Whitaker, had always said, "You don't just sell someone a car, you sell them peace of mind." Graham had taken that to heart, turning Harborline into one of the most respected classic car dealerships on the East Coast. But lately, things felt off. Cars were going missing during interbranch transfers. Sales staff seemed more focused on quotas than connection. Worst of all, his once flawless inventory system showed unexplained losses marked as damaged in transport. Graham had always believed in trusting his people, but trust without verification, he now realized, was a weakness. He glanced at an old photo on his desk, himself at 20, covered in grease, standing proudly beside a freshly restored '69 GTO, his dad's arm slung around his shoulder. That young man wouldn't have ignored his gut. That young man would have gone back into the garage to figure things out himself. Maybe it was time he stopped acting like a CEO and started acting like the mechanic who built this place. He reached for his notebook and began sketching a plan. Not a business strategy, but a disguise. He would re-enter his own dealership undercover, posing as Greg Winston, a quiet, recently retired naval engineer with cash to burn and a lifelong dream of owning a classic ride. No corporate titles, no expectations, just one man walking his showroom floor to find the cracks that threatened to break everything his family had built. The decision felt reckless, even dangerous, but it also felt right. Graham tucked the binder into his drawer and locked it, his mind already working through the details. If his legacy was on the line, he wasn't going to let it slip away. Not without a fight. Graham stepped through the front doors of Harborline Auto Emporium not as its owner, but as a stranger. Wearing a faded ball cap, aviator glasses, and a thrift store windbreaker over a flannel shirt, he passed unnoticed beneath the gleaming showroom sign he'd designed himself 20 years ago. Inside, the dealership looked pristine. Classic Mustangs and Ferraris bathed in soft lighting, chrome polished to perfection, jazz humming faintly through ceiling speakers. But from the customer's vantage point, things felt different. He was greeted by Tina McCall, a bubbly saleswoman with a charming smile and sharp eyes. "Looking for something special today?" she asked, her tone friendly but clipped, like someone rehearsing a line she'd used too many times. Graham introduced himself as Greg Winston and asked about a 1967 Shelby GT500 in the corner. Tina's demeanor shifted almost imperceptibly, her eyes narrowing slightly. "That one's not officially for sale," she said, lowering her voice. "But for a serious buyer, someone who knows how things work, we can make exceptions." The phrasing was vague, but the implication was clear. As she walked him around, Graham noticed something else. Pressure sales. Alan Briggs, the dealership sales director, was leaning hard on a hesitant young couple looking at a '72 Chevelle, offering discounts that didn't make financial sense. His voice was smooth, but his eyes were scanning the room, calculating. Graham wandered the floor, asked questions, and took mental notes. Several sales reps seemed distracted, more focused on commissions than customers. Then came the moment that confirmed his suspicions. While pretending to inspect a cherry-red Corvette Stingray, he overheard two customers speaking in hushed tones near the parts counter. "Marco says he can cut the price in half. No papers, no trail," one whispered. "You just gotta meet him out back." Graham's breath caught. Marco Velez, his inventory supervisor, a man he'd trusted to oversee transport, storage, and damage reports. The conversation was brief, but its implications hit like a gut punch. There was something happening here. Off-the-books transactions, maybe even stolen inventory, and it wasn't just some rogue side hustle. It felt organized, protected, and worst of all, it was happening right in the heart of the empire Graham had built on honesty. He nodded politely at Tina, pretending to admire the car's leather interior, but inside his pulse was hammering. He'd come here looking for weak spots in customer service. What he'd found instead was the smoke of something much darker, and he had no doubt there was fire behind it. Back in a corner booth at Dockside Diner just 2 blocks from the showroom, Graham sipped lukewarm coffee as the glow of his laptop lit up his weathered face. He wasn't an IT expert, but he knew his business inside and out, and the numbers weren't lying. He had logged into Harborline's back-end inventory system, something Marco Velez had personally overseen and upgraded just 6 months ago. Everything looked polished, even too perfect. Damage logs, transfer schedules, repair invoices, all stamped with digital precision. But the more Graham cross-referenced shipment records with original VINs and transport manifests, the more a chilling pattern emerged. Every Tuesday and Thursday night, without fail, a high-value vehicle was marked damaged in transit and rerouted to a fictional repair partner that didn't show up on any official vendor list. No insurance claims were filed, no repair updates logged. These weren't broken cars. They were disappearing quietly into thin air. Graham's fingers flew across the keyboard, heart pounding as he matched timestamps with employee schedules. Marco had been working those exact nights, often alone. Then came Tina McCall's hiring record, personally recommended by Marco, with a background that on the surface was spotless. But when Graham ran her references through an open-source aggregator, the illusion unraveled. Each employer she'd listed had closed within a year of her departure. The locations, all in regions where luxury car theft rings had recently made headlines. It was no coincidence. Even worse, Sean Delaney, his lifelong family friend and current head of security, had signed off on the scheduling changes that gave Marco unrestricted access to warehouse storage and vehicle data. The betrayal cut deep. Sean had once helped Graham and his father rebuild after a fire nearly destroyed the business. But now, it seemed he'd sold that loyalty for a seat at the table of something far more sinister. Then, Graham's burner phone buzzed. A text meant for Greg Winston, 11 p.m., behind the service bay, bring cash. The deal was real, and they had no idea they were speaking to the owner. Graham stared at the screen, a storm building behind his eyes. What started as a mystery about customer satisfaction had become a full-blown criminal conspiracy. One designed not only to bleed his company dry, but to make it look like he had been the mastermind. The walls of his legacy were rotting from within, and now he had 8 hours to bring it all crashing down. As dusk settled over the quiet coastal town, Graham pulled into the gravel driveway of the old family garage behind his house, the place where it had all started. The scent of motor oil and aged leather still lingered in the air, wrapping around him like a familiar embrace. He switched off the engine and stepped inside, eyes drifting across the rusted toolboxes, faded blueprints, and vintage license plates nailed to the walls. In the corner sat the old '69 Camaro he and his father had restored when Graham was just a teenager, its cherry red paint dulled by time, but still gleaming with memory. He walked over and ran his hand along the hood, the cool metal anchoring him. Walt Whitaker had built this place not as a business, but as a sanctuary, where every tool had a story, and every repair was a lesson in patience, integrity, and pride. Graham could still hear his father's voice echoing from the past. Son, trust isn't something you hand out. It's something you earn. Every day, every bolt, every deal. That wisdom had shaped Harborline Auto into what it was. And now, standing here on the verge of losing it all, Graham felt his resolve harden. The betrayal hurt, yes, but it also ignited something fierce inside him. A need not just to save the company, but to protect what his father had entrusted him with. He picked up the old oil-stained shop rag they used to joke was lucky and tied it around his wrist like a silent promise. There would be no corporate statement, no quiet HR investigation. This wasn't about protecting a brand, it was about defending a legacy. He reached for his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. A contact from the FBI, someone he'd helped years ago during a stolen VIN sting operation. "I've got something big," he said when the line picked up. "And I need to move fast." With the gears now in motion, Graham returned to the house, pulled out the burner phone from his jacket and reread the message. 11 p.m., behind the service bay. Bring cash. The trap was set, and when it sprung, Graham wouldn't just be a witness. He'd be the one who lit the fuse. The wind howled off the harbor as Graham parked his unmarked rental car 3 blocks from the dealership, its matte black finish blending into the shadows. From this vantage point, he had a clear view of Harbor Line's rear lot, now transformed into something far darker than a place of business. At 10:42 p.m., right on cue, a roll-up bay door slid open and 2 figures wheeled a car onto the pavement, its body draped in moving blankets. But the silhouette was unmistakable. A 1967 Shelby GT500. Graham's breath hitched. That car had been marked damaged during delivery just days ago. Marco emerged next, flanked by Tina and Alan, each moving with the calm efficiency of practiced criminals. Tina handed off a clipboard while Alan wheeled out another covered vehicle. This one a rare Porsche Speedster. Then Sean Delaney arrived, pulling into the employee lot with a casualness that twisted Graham's gut. The man who once swore to protect Harbor Line's security walked up to Marco like they were old poker buddies. They laughed, shook hands. Graham's grip tightened on his handheld camera. At 11:00 p.m. sharp, headlights flared as a black SUV and 2 cargo vans crept into the lot. Out stepped Chrono, the slick-talking buyer Graham had seen earlier in the showroom, now surrounded by 2 heavily built associates. Their walk was military. These weren't just collectors. They were part of a larger machine. Marco approached with confidence, shaking hands and gesturing to the covered vehicles. One by one, the blankets were pulled back, revealing cars worth hundreds of thousands, each supposedly destroyed, damaged, or lost in transit. The buyers circled the merchandise while Tina discreetly exchanged manila envelopes. Alan and Sean hovered near the lot's edge, acting as sentries. Graham documented everything: faces, timestamps, license plates. But something felt different tonight. The pace was hurried, the glances sharper. They were moving not just cars, but everything. Graham realized with a sickening clarity they were abandoning the operation. Something had tipped them off. Maybe Tina caught his lingering gaze in the showroom. Maybe Marco sensed the heat. Either way, they were clearing inventory and disappearing before dawn. Then Marco's phone buzzed. He barked a few words, then nodded to Alan. The roll-up door opened wider and a 3rd van backed in. They weren't done. They were accelerating. Graham's heart pounded. He glanced at his watch. 11:09. Just a few more minutes. Behind the dealership, Harbor Line's proud facade stood silent, unaware that tonight, beneath its polished glass and neon glow, its soul was being auctioned off. The wail of sirens shattered the tense silence as unmarked FBI vehicles surged into the lot, floodlights blazing across chrome and concrete. Chaos erupted. Buyers scrambled, mechanics dropped what they were loading, and Sean shouted orders that were lost in the rising noise. From the shadows, Graham sprang into motion, swinging his rental car around the rear fence just in time to block Marco's escape path. The logistics manager skidded to a halt, a duffel bag clutched in his hand, his eyes going wide with recognition. "You!" he spat, breath ragged. "I should have known." Graham stepped out calmly, eyes like steel. "You should have. But you were too busy counting the money to notice who built the walls you were stealing from." Marco's hand twitched near his jacket, but Graham was faster. One swift move, a shoulder drop, and Marco hit the ground hard. The duffel spilled open, stacks of rubber-banded cash scattering like leaves in the wind. 2 agents rushed in, pinning Marco and reading him his rights. "You think this ends with me?" he sneered as they hauled him up. "This goes way beyond Harbor Line." Graham didn't flinch. "Maybe so," he said, stepping closer. "But it ends here for you." Elsewhere in the lot, Tina was being cuffed with a scowl of pure disdain, while Alan folded like a cheap lawn chair the moment they took his phone, spilling everything about forged documents and the plan to shift blame onto Graham. The agents confirmed what Graham had feared. The operation wasn't just a theft ring, it was a laundering front, and all the breadcrumbs had been planted to lead back to him. They wanted to make it look like you orchestrated the whole thing, said Agent Clara Rowe as she joined him, badge in hand. Had you not gone undercover, this story would have ended very differently. And then there was Sean. Red-faced and trembling, the former security chief was still shouting over the din. He knew! Graham's behind all of it! He's been laundering since day one! But the agents weren't buying it, especially with months of surveillance and digital evidence pointing everywhere but Graham. Clara silenced Sean with a cold look and a curt nod to her team. You're done. As the final van was impounded and the last of the criminals were led away, Graham stood alone amid the flashing lights. His business had nearly been stolen, his name nearly dragged through the mud, but he'd fought back, not with lawyers or spin, but with his own hands, eyes, and gut, just like his father taught him. Weeks had passed since the sting, but the memory of that night still lingered in Graham's bones like the hum of a car engine after the key turned off. Harborline Auto had weathered the storm, but rebuilding wasn't about sweeping up broken glass. It was about restoring faith, and Graham knew that would only happen if he rewired the heart of the business. The first change came quietly but firmly. Clara Rowe, the FBI agent who'd helped crack the case, accepted his offer to become head of security. If I'm going to keep chasing ghosts, she'd said with a smile, I'd rather do it from a place with coffee and integrity. Together, they overhauled the dealership's infrastructure, installing discreet but powerful surveillance, reworking inventory tracking, and adding multi-factor VIN verification on all vehicles. But Graham's vision went beyond protection. He wanted Harborline to stand for something better, something redemptive. That's when the Second Gear program was born, a hiring initiative designed for people who'd made mistakes but were ready to rebuild their lives. Each new employee went through rigorous training, not just in sales or mechanics, but in values, honesty, pride in craft, and what it meant to be part of something bigger than yourself. Graham personally interviewed every candidate. When asked why, he always answered the same way: because someone once trusted me before I'd proven anything. He also redesigned the showroom not just cosmetically, but symbolically. Where plaques once displayed sales records now stood a legacy wall, filled with photos of Walt Whitaker, customer thank you notes, and a brass plate etched with the words, "Built with integrity, rebuilt with purpose." Graham walked those floors daily again, not as a distant executive, but as a present leader, nodding to his techs, answering questions from first-time buyers, and occasionally rolling up his sleeves in the garage. The community responded, old customers returned, new ones arrived, and trust, slow, quiet, but real, began to grow again. Harborline wasn't just back in business, it was forging a new identity, a dealership where experience met empathy, and where every key handed over wasn't just a sale, it was a second chance, for both customer and crew. The morning sun spilled through Harborline Auto's new smart tint windows, casting a golden glow over rows of polished classics and next-gen restorations. Graham stood near the showroom entrance, arms crossed, watching a young man in a crisp navy polo patiently walk an elderly customer around a mint-condition '68 Mustang. That man was Deshaun "Rev" Jacobs, a former street racer who'd once spent nights tearing through back alleys and stolen imports. Now he was Harborline's top apprentice. Part of the Second Gear program, part of something bigger. Graham watched with quiet pride as Rev opened the driver's door for the woman and helped her inside with a grace that couldn't be taught. The engine roared to life, low and rich, and her laughter filled the air. That sound, the joy, the trust, the renewal, was the very heartbeat of what Harborline had become. Across the room, Clara approached with a tablet in hand, her tone brisk but warm. "Just heard from Portland. Another chop shop posing as a dealership tried pulling the same scam, but thanks to our new alert network, the feds shut it down before they moved a single car." Graham nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting. Every system, every security measure, every ounce of transparency they'd built wasn't just protecting them, it was helping clean up the industry they loved. He moved toward the garage bay where new hires were gathered around a stripped-down Pontiac chassis, listening to one of the senior mechanics explain the rebuild process. They were part of the newest cohort, vets, former inmates, and kids who had made bad calls but were ready to do better. Graham clapped one on the shoulder and offered a word of encouragement before turning toward his office. On his desk sat the draft proposal for Heritage Road, a national mentorship program connecting at-risk youth with restoration professionals, schools, and law enforcement. Built on the model Harborline had proved could work, Graham picked it up, slipped it into a leather folder, and smiled. Harborline Auto wasn't just a dealership anymore. It was a proving ground for redemption, for trust, for second chances. As the Mustang rumbled past the front windows and into the world, Graham closed his eyes for a moment and listened, not just to the engine, but to the quiet echo of his father's voice. That's what pride sounds like. The story of Harborline Auto Emporium teaches a powerful lesson about legacy, vigilance, and redemption. At its heart, it's a reminder that even the most carefully built institutions can be corroded from within if trust goes unverified. Graham Whitaker, a man who built his business on integrity and his father's values, learns that leadership isn't just about growth, it's about guarding the soul of what you've built. When betrayal strikes from his inner circle, Graham doesn't retreat behind lawyers or PR teams. He returns to his roots, goes undercover, and confronts the rot head-on. But the deeper lesson lies in what follows. Rebuilding isn't just about tightening locks. It's about expanding hearts. Instead of becoming jaded, Graham uses the crisis to transform his business into a place of second chances, offering redemption not only to those who once betrayed his trust, but to those seeking to reclaim their own. The story shows that strength isn't in avoiding pain, but in responding to it with purpose. Through humility, courage, and vision, Graham turns loss into legacy. It's a story that reminds us integrity must be protected, but it can also be reborn, stronger, when shaped by both wisdom and grace.